about believing what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry said. I don't need to, because you think the British media were against you. I actually think the media was incredibly supportive of them right to the crisis. No, the world's biggest victims right now are the Duke and Duchess of Netflix. And don't take my word.
You know what's strange? Sometimes a story doesn't fall apart because someone attacks it. It falls apart because the pieces just don't sit right next to each other. And that's exactly what people say happened with Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie. On the surface, it should have been simple, a royal baby, a happy announcement, a clear timeline, but that's not how it unfolded. Instead, people started noticing little things, small details, easy to ignore at first. A baby bump that looked different from one photo to the next. Dates that didn't seem to line up, plans that changed suddenly with no explanation. And then silence. That silence is what made people lean in closer. Because when questions are asked and no one answers them, curiosity doesn't die, it grows. And when Piers Morgan stepped in, waving papers on live television, claiming the entire thing looked choreographed, that curiosity exploded.
Nothing I thought about Meghan Markle was driven by anything to do with her race or skin color. Why would it be?
What's interesting isn't just what he said. It's what didn't happen afterward. No outrage, no detailed denial. No clear explanation, just quiet. So today, we're going to walk through what people noticed, what raised eyebrows, and why that silence spoke louder than any statement ever could. Before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on.
She came out with in that interview, so be it. I'm always in talks with people. I think I've been talking to you guys.
Because once you see how these pieces connect, you won't look at this story the same way again. Let's begin. At first, everything looked picture perfect. The photos, the lighting, the angles, every image felt polished, almost like it belonged in a magazine spread. The bump always caught the light just right. The outfits were carefully chosen.
You may not agree with it. I think most people who watched the interview probably ended up agreeing with me. It doesn't really matter whether you agree or not.
The poses looked thoughtful, intentional. And at the beginning, people loved it. It was a royal pregnancy. Of course, there was interest. People wanted updates. They wanted to feel part of the journey. And Meghan spoke about wanting something different, something calmer, something private. She talked about a home birth.
Piers Morgan is slamming Meghan Markle yet again following her win in her case against Associated Newspapers.
A peaceful experience, away from cameras and chaos. Frogmore Cottage seemed like the perfect place for that vision, quiet, personal, intimate. It fit the image she was presenting. So everyone assumed that's how it would happen until suddenly. It didn't. On May 6, 2019, expectations flipped overnight. Instead of Frogmore Cottage, Meghan was at Portland Hospital in London, a private hospital in Westminster known for elite care. Now, let's be clear about something. Hospital births are not strange. Changing plans during pregnancy is normal. Doctors recommend what's safest. Situations evolve. That part isn't suspicious. What was noticeable was the lack of explanation. No statement saying plans had changed for medical reasons. No update from the palace. No acknowledgement at all, just silence. And when you've spent weeks building a story about privacy and a home birth, then suddenly switch directions without saying why, people start asking questions. Not out of cruelty, out of confusion. That's when people began looking backward. Re-examining everything that came before, those soft, beautiful photos suddenly felt less casual. More staged, more controlled, less like moments, more like scenes. People started comparing images, side by side, week by week. And that's when things got uncomfortable. In one photo, the bump sat high. In another, taken days later, it appeared much lower. Sometimes it looked very pronounced. Other times, barely visible. Yes, clothes matter. Yes, posture matters. Yes, angles matter. But when inconsistencies show up again and again over months, people stop brushing it off. The questions grew louder, and the overall vibe of the pregnancy started to feel managed. Every photo release felt timed. Every appearance felt deliberate. every detail came out exactly when it benefited the narrative most. Again, celebrities do this all the time, but here's the conflict people couldn't ignore. You can't ask for total privacy while tightly controlling every image, every update, every detail. Once one thing feels off, people start wondering what else might not add up. And that curiosity opened the door to something bigger. According to later claims, someone close to the situation decided to speak. Not publicly, but quietly, they allegedly shared internal scheduling notes. Behind-the-scenes documents, timelines that told a very different story from what the public was shown. And this is where things became explosive. Because those notes supposedly showed hospital visits scheduled on days when Meghan was photographed elsewhere in London, not nearby, not an hour apart, but across the city at the same time, full-day contradictions. The kind where logic simply stops working, people tried to explain it away. Maybe the times were wrong, maybe plans changed, but the more examples that surfaced, the harder it became to dismiss all of them, and then came the birth arrival story. The official narrative described a calm, quiet hospital arrival, peaceful, controlled, but even that timeline raised eyebrows. Details shifted, statements changed, information arrived late. And through it all, the same pattern remained: no clarity, no full explanation, just carefully chosen words and long pauses. Then Piers Morgan went on air, angry, animated, holding papers. He claimed this wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Like a production planned, scripted. Now people either love or hate Piers Morgan. But love him or not, one thing stood out. When he made these claims, no one directly challenged the specifics. There was no detailed rebuttal, no breakdown disproving the documents, no clear timeline released to shut it down, just silence. And silence in moments like this becomes its own message, because if everything truly lined up, if there was a clean explanation, why not just give it? That question still hangs in the air. This is why the story never fully went away. Not because of hatred, not because of obsession, but because humans hate unfinished puzzles, and this one still feels unfinished. Every time people think it's settled, another inconsistency gets remembered. Another clip resurfaces, another timeline gets questioned. And the silence remains. Maybe there are simple explanations. Maybe there aren't, but when a story is told one way, then quietly adjusted without explanation, people notice. And when no one fills in the gaps, the public does it themselves. That's how stories grow. That's how theories are born. Not from noise, but from what isn't said. You know how some moments are supposed to be quiet, private, calm? Exactly what Meghan had been asking for. Sounds simple, right? Except, according to some scheduling details, on the day she was supposedly making this peaceful hospital entrance, she wasn't even there. She was somewhere else entirely. And that's the kind of detail that makes you stop and say, wait, hold on a second. People started piecing together timelines. Public sightings, photos, events compared to what the documents supposedly said. And the more they compared, the less sense it made. Photos from certain weeks didn't match the trimester she was supposedly in. Appearances where she looked one way happened on dates that should have shown something completely different. It was like trying to solve a puzzle. But half the pieces came from another box, then Piers Morgan jumped in. On his show, papers in hand, not holding back. He went line by line, date by date, asking how any of this was supposed to make sense. You could tell he was loving it. This is exactly the kind of contradiction-filled scenario he thrives on. He pointed out specific days where the paperwork said one thing, but photos proved something else entirely, gaps, overlaps, moments where the story told to the public didn't match what was happening behind the scenes. His question was simple: if basic facts like dates and locations can't be consistent, what does that say about everything else? Pregnancy isn't vague. A 9-month journey has very clear milestones. Second trimester looks different from third. Hospital visits happen on real, documented days. Births have time stamps. So, when the records and public appearances didn't line up, there was no gray area. Either the dates matched, or they didn't. Either she was where the record said, or where the cameras caught her, not both. And that had everyone's head spinning. This wasn't opinion or interpretation. This was simple, factual information. Did this happen on this day? Was she in this place at that time? The answers kept changing. Then came the bump. And I know how this sounds, but hear me out. When you look at photos of Meghan throughout the pregnancy side by side, the bump seems to change dramatically. High one day, low the next, big in one photo, barely visible a couple days later. Yes, clothing matters, posture matters, angles matter. But the differences were too big, too consistent to be explained by outfits alone. Piers pulled up clips from events just days apart. The changes weren't subtle, they were dramatic. People online started making their own comparisons, side-by-side timelines, and the questions kept piling up. Morgan's take: marketing, not maternity. He argued that every appearance, every photo, every bump shot was controlled, staged, not in a she wants to look nice way, but in a this is a production kind of way. He even claimed there were multiple versions of the birth story written in advance, different scenarios, different narratives, different outcomes, ready to release depending on how things actually played out. Who does that? Most of us announce a birth simply, baby's here, everyone's healthy, here's the name, done. But according to him, Archie's arrival may have had entire narratives pre-written, ready to control exactly how the story would be told. Morgan framed it as optics over everything. Not the health, not the natural joy, not the experience of becoming parents. How it looked to the outside world came first. Every image, every gesture, every cradling of the bump seemed designed for effect. Now let's talk palace staff. Meghan had claimed during her pregnancy that she was treated poorly, cold, dismissive, sometimes cruel, isolated, unsupported, left to handle everything herself while navigating press pressures and royal duties. Sympathy came naturally. No one wants to imagine a pregnant woman feeling alone or mistreated. But then, insider memos surfaced. According to them, the reality might have been very different. Staff were instructed to accommodate every request, every unusual or inconvenient timing, no hesitation, no delay. Wardrobe changes, special requests, personal needs, staff bent over backwards. Some even worked double shifts just to keep up. That doesn't sound cold or dismissive. It sounds like people going above and beyond, sometimes at great personal cost, to make sure she was comfortable. And that's where it gets really complicated. There were moments that didn't quite match the story being told. Documents suggested Meghan had refused certain meetings or events, but later, publicly, it sounded like she'd been excluded. The official narrative was that the palace had shut her out, but the paperwork seemed to tell a very different story. Invitations were sent, requests were accommodated, and staff even worked double shifts to keep up with unscheduled wardrobe changes. Piers Morgan went all in on this. On his show, he read these communications out loud, disbelief dripping from his voice. Lines about staff bending over backwards, declined meetings spun as exclusions. Every detail he shared built the argument that the public story of mistreatment didn't line up with what was actually happening behind the scenes. His point was clear: the palace wasn't oppressing her. If anything, they were going above and beyond to satisfy her. Yet, when she made choices that didn't fit the narrative she wanted to tell later, the story got rewritten anyway, painting her as the victim. Morgan highlighted how specific and documented these details were: timestamps, internal memos, actual communications between Meghan and staff. These weren't vague feelings or impressions. These were facts. Either the records existed or they didn't. Either she declined meetings or she was excluded. There wasn't much middle ground. And as people saw this evidence, some began to reconsider. Those who had fully backed Meghan started wondering, maybe the palace was actually trying to help, and some of the isolation she described was at least partly self-imposed or exaggerated. Then came the silence. After all the timeline questions, the bump inconsistencies, the staff memo contradictions, Nothing, no statement, no official clarification. No social media posts or public appearances to reassure anyone, and that silence hit differently. Because, historically, Meghan has defended herself quickly and decisively. Instagram posts, interviews, magazine statements, she's never shied away from correcting the narrative. So, when all these detailed questions arose about her pregnancy and she said nothing, people noticed. Morgan pointed this out relentlessly. Where's the response? Where's the correction? Where's the usual playbook? And suddenly, silence became its own message. Even Harry stayed quiet. A man whose entire story for leaving royal life was about protecting his family from false narratives. He said nothing. Friends and celebrity supporters who had defended Meghan before also stayed silent. No tweets, no posts, no Instagram stories, no coordinated PR effort. When silence dominates, people fill the vacuum themselves. Speculation grows, questions solidify into assumptions. When allies go quiet, it feels like maybe they know something uncomfortable, something they don't want to defend. And then there were the visuals. Morgan pulled video clips side by side. Interviews where Meghan described being incapacitated by morning sickness, bedridden, needing constant rest, cut to appearances where she was walking, smiling, interacting, looking perfectly fine. Yes, morning sickness fluctuates, and some days are better than others, but the contrast was dramatic. Morgan highlighted physical inconsistencies too, cradling the bump carefully for cameras at one event, then jogging upstairs days later, hand off the belly, moving freely. He called it theatrical. According to him, those public pregnancy moments weren't just about comfort or necessity, they were performances, staged for effect. The dreamy looks, the gentle hand placements, the careful lowering into chairs, each moment crafted to be seen, and the pattern wasn't isolated. Over months, at multiple events, the same behavior repeated, highly visible, pronounced pregnancy for cameras, but completely normal and energetic when she thought no one was watching. Morgan even revisited the Oprah interview. He paused frames, analyzed facial expressions, the timing of pauses, the welling of tears that never fully fell, pointing out how rehearsed it seemed. He compared it to other interviews, showing almost identical pauses, expressions, and delivery each time. The critique? The vulnerability looked scripted, less like spontaneous emotion and more like carefully timed storytelling.